The telegram trembled in Nathaniel Kingston's weathered hands as he stood on the dusty platform of Las Lunas, New Mexico, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. It was 1885, and the 30-year-old rancher had finally done what many considered the desperate act of a lonely man he'd sent away for a mail-order bride. "Train's coming," the station master called, his voice barely audible over the approaching whistle of the westbound Pacific and Eastern. Nathaniel straightened his freshly pressed shirt and adjusted his hat. The last 6 years of solitary ranching had hardened him, but today, nervousness coursed through him like a spring flood. The woman in the photograph he'd received, Nora Valcourt, 23, from Boston, had kind eyes and a gentle smile that stirred something long dormant in his chest. The train hissed to a stop, belching steam across the platform. Passengers began to disembark, well-dressed businessmen and families stepping down onto the wooden planks. Nathaniel scanned each face, searching for the woman who had described herself as of medium height with auburn hair. When he finally saw her, she was standing alone at the far end of the platform, a single valise clutched in her gloved hands. Her travel dress was simple but elegant, the deep blue fabric contrasting with her pale complexion. Her auburn hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, just as she described, but her eyes darted nervously, scanning the crowd with unmistakable anxiety. Nathaniel approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Miss Valcourt," he called softly when he was a few paces away. She turned sharply, her posture rigid with tension. "Mr. Kingston." Her voice carried the refined tones of the East, but there was something else there, a tremor that spoke of more than travel fatigue. "Yes, madam. Welcome to Las Lunas." He removed his hat and offered a slight bow. "I hope your journey wasn't too taxing." "It was eventful." She clutched her valise tighter, knuckles white against the leather. "Thank you for meeting me." Nathaniel reached for her bag. "May I?" She hesitated before releasing it into his care. "You're very kind. My wagon's just out front." "It's not a fancy rig, but my ranch is only about an hour's ride from here." As they walked toward the wagon, Nathaniel noticed how she kept glancing over her shoulder, as though expecting someone to follow. When they passed the sheriff's office, her steps quickened noticeably. "First time in New Mexico territory?" he asked, trying to ease her obvious discomfort. "Yes," she replied, her attention clearly elsewhere. "It's more open than I expected." "That's what most Easterners say. Takes some getting used to all this sky." Nathaniel helped her into the wagon, noting how lightly she traveled for someone who'd supposedly packed up her entire life. Just the one small valise and nothing more. As they left town, the late October sun beating down on their backs, Nora seemed to relax incrementally with each mile that stretched between them and Las Lunas. The rigid set of her shoulders softened, and she began to take in the rugged landscape with genuine interest. "It's beautiful," she said softly, in a wild sort of way. Nathaniel smiled. "That's a good description. Not as refined as Boston, I imagine." "Boston has its own kind of wilderness," she replied cryptically. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon wheels filling the void. Finally, Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Miss Valcourt, I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you right away. We'll have a proper courtship, even if it's after your arrival rather than before." He kept his eyes on the road, giving her space. "If you decide this isn't what you want, I'll see that you get safely back to wherever you wish to go." Nora's hands twisted in her lap. "That's very generous, Mr. Kingston." "Nathaniel, please." "Nathaniel." She tested his name cautiously. "I should probably tell you something before we go any further." He waited, his heart suddenly pounding. I wasn't entirely truthful in my letters." Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "About what?" Nora inhaled deeply, as though gathering courage. "My name is Nora Valcourt, that much is true, but I didn't come here from Boston because I wanted a husband." Her eyes, when she finally looked at him directly, were filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I came because I'm running from the law." The wagon wheels continued to turn, kicking up dust in their wake. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily against the endless blue sky. "What kind of trouble?" Nathaniel asked, his voice steady despite the shock of her confession. "They say I stole jewelry from the family that employed me, valuable pieces. They had me arrested, but I escaped custody during transport." Her hands were shaking now. "I didn't do it. I was framed by the son of the house when I refused his advances, but no one would believe a lady's companion over a Beacon Hill gentleman." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Then he simply nodded and said, "I don't care about yesterday." Nora stared at him, disbelief written across her features. "What?" "I said I don't care about yesterday." He turned to meet her gaze, his eyes clear and direct. "Out here, folks get second chances, sometimes third and fourth ones too. The land's too harsh to waste time judging each other for past mistakes. But I could bring trouble to your door. Trouble finds everyone eventually. At least this way, you're not facing it alone." Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly brushed them away. "You can't possibly mean that." "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Nathaniel adjusted the reins in his calloused hands. "You had the courage to tell me the truth when you could have kept silent. That says something about your character. You're not afraid I'm lying now, that I might actually be guilty." He considered her question seriously. "Are you?" "No," she said firmly, meeting his gaze without wavering. "I'm not a thief." "Then that's good enough for me. For now, anyway." He offered her a small smile. "The rest we'll figure out as we go along." Relief softened her features, making her appear younger, less burdened. "Thank you." They crested a small rise, and Nathaniel pointed ahead. "That's my place. It's not much to look at, but the land is good." Sprawled in the valley below was a modest ranch house with several outbuildings. A corral held a small herd of horses, and cattle grazed on the surrounding grasslands. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, well-maintained, the work of a man who took pride in what he'd built. "It looks like a home," Nora said softly. Nathaniel glanced at her, surprised by the wistfulness in her voice. "It is that. Lonely sometimes, but a good place to put down roots." As they approached the ranch, a large dog came bounding out to greet them, barking enthusiastically. "That's Rusty," Nathaniel said. "Don't worry, he's all noise, no bite." "I like dogs," Nora replied, some of the tension returning to her voice. "I just haven't been around them much." When they reached the house, Nathaniel helped her down from the wagon. "I fixed up a room for you. It's small, but it's private. There's a lock on the door." She looked at him with surprise. "You thought of that? A woman traveling alone to marry a stranger might appreciate some security," he said simply. "At least until we know each other better." Inside, the house was modestly furnished but clean. A living area with a stone fireplace opened to a dining space and kitchen. A narrow hallway led to what Nora presumed were bedrooms. "Your room is this one," Nathaniel said, opening the first door off the hallway. "Mine's at the far end, so you'll have your privacy." The room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a wash basin. Curtains made from flour sacks framed a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It's lovely," Nora said, meaning it. After weeks of running, hiding, and sleeping in whatever shelter she could find, the simple room seemed like a palace. "I'll let you get settled. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I usually have supper around sunset, but take all the time you need." When he left, Closing the door behind him, Nora sat heavily on the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the day. She had expected rejection, anger, perhaps even a threat to turn her in to the authorities. Instead, this quiet, steady man had offered her understanding and shelter without demanding immediate explanations. She unpacked her meager belongings: 2 changes of clothes, a hairbrush, a small portrait of her parents, and a worn Bible. At the bottom of her valise lay a crumpled wanted poster with her face crudely sketched upon it, the words "Wanted, Thief" emblazoned across the top. She'd snatched it from a post office wall in St. Louis, terrified at how quickly word of her escape had spread. Nora tucked the poster beneath the mattress and splashed water on her face, trying to wash away the dust of travel and the lingering fear that had been her constant companion. She changed into her cleanest dress, a simple cotton garment in pale green, and carefully repinned her hair. When she emerged from her room, Nathaniel was in the kitchen, slicing bread. The smell of stew simmering on the stove made her stomach growl, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since early morning. "Can I help with anything?" she offered. Nathaniel looked up, momentarily startled by her presence. "No need. I'm used to cooking for myself. Please, I'd like to earn my keep." Something in her tone made him study her more carefully. "This isn't about earning your keep, Nora. You're not a servant here." "Then what am I?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, raw and vulnerable. "Right now, you're a guest," he said carefully. "In time, if things work out between us, maybe you'll be more, but there's no hurry to define it." She nodded, accepting his answer but still feeling adrift. "At least let me set the table." He showed her where the dishes were kept, and they worked together in a surprisingly comfortable silence. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Over supper, Nathaniel told her about the ranch, how he'd built it up from nearly nothing after coming west with little more than his horse and the clothes on his back. He spoke of the harsh winters, the brutal summers, the loneliness of the vast open spaces, all without self-pity or complaint. "What made you decide to send for a bride?" Nora asked when he fell silent. Nathaniel considered the question, taking his time to respond. "I realized I was building something that would outlast me but had no one to share it with, no one to leave it to." His eyes met hers across the table. "And the nights get long out here with only your thoughts for company." "I understand loneliness," she said softly. "I figured you might." He cleared his throat. "Now I think it's your turn. Tell me about Nora Valcourt, the real woman, not the one from the letters." She tensed, but his expression remained open, genuinely interested rather than accusatory. "I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut. My father was a bookkeeper, my mother a seamstress. They both died of influenza when I was 18. The familiar pain of their loss washed over her. With no other family, I had to make my own way. I was educated enough to become a companion to wealthy ladies. That's how I ended up with the Prescott family in Boston. And that's where the trouble started." Nora nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate. "Mrs. Prescott was kind enough, but her son, Edmund, was persistent in his attentions. When I refused him, he became angry. A week later, Mrs. Prescott's diamond necklace disappeared from her dressing table after Edmund had seen me alone in her room, delivering a message. And they accused you." Without hesitation, Edmund claimed he'd seen me handling the jewelry, acting suspiciously. His mother believed him, of course. Bitterness crept into her voice. "The police came that same day. I was to be transported to the women's penitentiary the following morning, but during the night the jail caught fire." "A fortunate coincidence," Nathaniel observed, his expression neutral. "It wasn't arson, if that's what you're thinking," Nora said quickly. "Lightning struck nearby." In the chaos, I simply walked away. No one was watching. And then, I worked my way west, taking odd jobs where I could. I saw your advertisement in a Kansas City newspaper and thought. She trailed off, embarrassed. You thought it would be a good place to hide, he finished for her. Yes, I'm sorry for the deception. I meant to tell you the truth eventually, but I was afraid you'd send me away. I still might, he said honestly. Not because of your past, but if this arrangement doesn't suit either of us. That's fair. She looked down at her empty plate. Thank you for supper. It was delicious. You're welcome. He stood, collecting their dishes. You must be tired after your journey. Feel free to retire whenever you wish. That night in her new room, Nora lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the New Mexico countryside. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind whispered around the eaves of the house. Despite the strangeness, she felt safer than she had in months. Whether that security was real or merely an illusion remained to be seen, but for now, she allowed herself to hope. In his own room, Nathaniel stared at the ceiling, wondering what madness had possessed him to accept a fugitive into his home so readily. He'd always considered himself a good judge of character, and something about Nora's story rang true. The fear in her eyes was genuine, as was the relief when he'd offered her shelter without judgment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, it was enough that they had both taken a leap of faith. The following days established a cautious routine. Nora, determined to be useful, took over much of the household management, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes that Nathaniel had neglected. He showed her around the ranch, introduced her to the horses, and taught her how to gather eggs from the ornery hens in the coop. A week after her arrival, Nathaniel announced that they needed supplies from town. I'd like you to come with me, he said over breakfast. People will talk less if they see us together. A mail-order bride staying hidden at the ranch would raise more eyebrows than one who accompanies her prospective husband to town. Nora's fork stilled. Is that wise? What if someone recognizes me? Las Lunas is a small place, and news from back east takes time to get here. But if you'd rather stay behind, I understand. She considered her options. Hiding forever wasn't practical, and she'd have to face the town eventually if she stayed. No, you're right, I'll come. Nathaniel nodded approvingly. We'll leave after breakfast. Wear something for the dust, the roads dry this time of year. The ride to town was tense for Nora, though Nathaniel maintained an easy conversation about the surrounding landscape and the history of the area. As they approached Las Lunas, he sensed her growing anxiety. Stay close to me, he said quietly. Most folks mind their own business, but newcomers always draw some attention. The town was busier than when Nora had arrived by train. Saturday was market day, and farmers from outlying areas had brought produce and goods to sell. Nathaniel tied the wagon in front of the general store and helped Nora down. Mr. Kingston, the shopkeeper, a balding man with spectacles, greeted them warmly. Twice in 1 month, that must be a record for you. His curious gaze shifted to Nora. Thomas, this is Miss Nora Valcourt. My fiancée, Nathaniel said, the word sounding strange on his tongue. Well now, that explains your shopping spree last week. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Valcourt. Thomas extended his hand, which Nora shook briefly. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thomas. Just Thomas, madam. Everyone calls me that. He beamed at them. So, when's the wedding? We haven't set a date yet, Nathaniel replied smoothly, giving ourselves time to get acquainted properly. Sensible approach, Thomas nodded, though folks out here don't usually have the luxury of long courtships. Life's too uncertain. While Nathaniel went through his list of supplies, Nora browsed the store, marveling at the variety of goods available in this frontier town. She was examining a bolt of calico when a voice behind her made her freeze. "You must be Kingston's mail-order bride." She turned to face a woman perhaps 10 years her senior, elegantly dressed despite the dusty surroundings. "Yes, I am," Nora replied, forcing a smile. "Nora Valcourt, Margaret Holloway. My husband owns the bank." The woman's eyes assessed Nora with unconcealed curiosity. "You're from the East, I understand. Connecticut originally, but I've traveled quite a bit." "Have you indeed? How interesting." Margaret's tone suggested she found it suspicious rather than intriguing. "What brought you to answer an advertisement from a rancher in New Mexico territory?" Before Nora could formulate a response, Nathaniel appeared at her side, his hand coming to rest lightly on her back. "Mrs. Holloway, I see you've met my fiancé." "Yes, we were just getting acquainted." Margaret smiled thinly. "You've kept her hidden away at your ranch." "People are starting to talk, are they? Well, that will give them something to do on these long autumn evenings." Nathaniel's tone was pleasant but firm. "If you'll excuse us, we have errands to complete before heading back." As they walked away, Nora whispered, "She's suspicious." "Margaret's suspicious of everyone. Her husband's even worse. Don't worry about them." They completed their shopping and were loading the wagon when Nathaniel spotted a familiar figure striding purposefully toward them. "Sheriff," he called in greeting, though Nora could feel him tense beside her. Sheriff Davis was a tall man with a silver mustache and alert eyes that didn't miss much. "Kingston," he nodded, then tipped his hat to Nora. "Madam, you must be the bride we've been hearing about." "Nora Valcourt," she introduced herself, fighting to keep her voice steady. "A pleasure to meet you, Sheriff, likewise." His gaze was assessing but not unfriendly. "Where are you from originally, Miss Valcourt?" "Connecticut," she answered truthfully, avoiding specifics. "Long way from home. I was ready for a change." The sheriff seemed about to say more when a commotion down the street caught his attention. Two cowboys were squaring off in front of the saloon, their argument growing louder. "Duty calls," he sighed. "Welcome to Las Lunas, Miss Valcourt. I hope you'll find our little town to your liking." With a final nod to Nathaniel, he strode toward the brewing conflict. "Let's go," Nathaniel said quietly, helping Nora into the wagon. Once they were out of town, Nora released a shaky breath. "That was terrifying." "You handled yourself well," he assured her. "The sheriff's a good man, but he's no fool. Best to be as truthful as possible without revealing too much." "You think he suspects something?" "He'd be a poor sheriff if he didn't question a stranger's sudden appearance." Nathaniel glanced at her. "But I've known John Davis for 6 years. He believes in justice more than the letter of the law." "Meaning?" "Meaning if your story is true about being falsely accused, he might be more inclined to help than harm. Especially if you've been here long enough to become part of the community." Nora considered this. "You think I should tell him the truth eventually?" "I think secrets have a way of being discovered, whether we want them to be or not. Better to control when and how that happens." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But that's a decision for another day. For now, let's focus on getting you settled." When they returned to the ranch, Nathaniel helped unload the supplies, then mentioned he needed to check on a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent windstorm. "Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" he asked. "Of course." Nora was already sorting through the purchases, planning what to prepare for supper. "I have plenty to keep me occupied." After he left, she set to work cleaning the kitchen thoroughly, then began preparing a beef stew that could simmer slowly until his return. As she chopped vegetables, she found herself humming softly, a simple domestic contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up sharply. It was too soon for Nathaniel to return, and he'd mentioned no expected visitors. Heart pounding, she peered out the window to see a rider approaching, not Nathaniel, but a stranger. Nora quickly dried her hands and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She remembered Nathaniel keeping a shotgun by the door but hoped she wouldn't need it. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door just as the rider dismounted. "Can I help you?" she called, staying within the door frame. The man, middle-aged and weather-beaten, removed his hat. "Afternoon, madam. Name's Ellis Parker. I'm looking for Nathaniel Kingston. He's checking fence lines. Should be back in a few hours." Parker nodded, seeming unsurprised. "You must be the bride Thomas mentioned. I own the neighboring ranch to the south." "Nora Valcourt," she confirmed, relaxing slightly. "Would you like to wait for him? I could offer you coffee." "That's mighty kind, but I won't intrude. Just tell him I stopped by about that bull he was interested in. It's available if he still wants it. I'll let him know." Parker replaced his hat and mounted his horse. "Welcome to the territory, Miss Valcourt. It's good to see Kingston finally bringing some life back to this place." After he left, Nora returned to her cooking, pondering his parting words. There was a story there, something about Nathaniel that she didn't yet know. The ranch showed signs of having once been more prosperous. The barn was larger than needed for his current herd, and several outbuildings stood empty. When Nathaniel returned as the sun was setting, he smelled the stew before he even entered the house. Inside, he found the kitchen transformed clean, organized with bread cooling on the windowsill and the table already set. "Something smells amazing," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I hope you like it." Nora stirred the pot one final time. "Your neighbor stopped by Ellis Parker. He said to tell you the bull you were interested in is available." "Ellis came here." Nathaniel seemed surprised. He usually avoids social calls. "He didn't stay. Didn't want to intrude," he said. Nora hesitated. "He also mentioned something about you bringing life back to this place." "What did he mean by that?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, washing his hands at the basin. "This ranch was bigger once," he finally said. "When I first came out here, I had a partner, Thomas Ross. We built it together over 4 years. Then there was a drought, followed by a harsh winter. We lost nearly half our cattle." "What happened to your partner?" "He took sick that winter, pneumonia. By the time I could get the doctor out here from Las Lunas, it was too late." Nathaniel's voice was steady, but Nora could hear the old grief beneath the words. "After that, I scaled back. Sold some land to Ellis, reduced the herd to what I could manage alone." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "That must have been difficult. It was a long time ago." He dried his hands and looked around the kitchen with appreciation. "You've been busy today. I enjoy having a home to care for." The words slipped out naturally, and Nora realized with some surprise that she already thought of this place as home, despite having been there barely a week. Over supper, they discussed the town visit, with Nathaniel reassuring her that her interactions had gone well. "People will be curious for a while, but they'll lose interest eventually. Small towns are like that intense interest that burns out quickly when the next bit of gossip comes along. Unless they discover I'm a fugitive," Nora pointed out. "There is that," he acknowledged with a half-smile. "But by then, hopefully you'll have enough friends here that it won't matter. You have a lot of faith in people. Not people in general, these people specifically." Nathaniel's expression grew serious. "This community has been good to me through some hard times. They're not perfect, but they look out for their own. And you think they'd consider me one of their own, a stranger with a questionable past? In time, yes, if you let them know you the real you." Nora shook her head, unconvinced. "You make it sound so simple, not simple, but possible." He leaned back in his chair. "The West isn't like the East, Nora. Out here, what matters most is what a person does today, not what they might have done yesterday." "I hope you're right," she said softly. That night, Nora dreamt of Boston, of narrow streets and tall houses, of Edmund Prescott's sneering face as the police led her away in handcuffs. She woke with a start, heart racing, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar room. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the simple furnishings. Gradually, her breathing slowed as reality reasserted itself. She was in New Mexico, not Massachusetts. She was safe, at least for now. Unable to return to sleep, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and quietly made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. To her surprise, she found Nathaniel sitting at the table, a lamp burning low beside him, a book open in his hands. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing anything." He closed the book. "Couldn't sleep. Bad dreams." Nora moved to the water bucket and dipped a cup. "What about you? Just restless. Happens sometimes." He watched her take a sip of water. "Would you like to sit for a while? Or would you prefer to be alone?" She hesitated, then took the chair across from him. "What were you reading?" He turned the book so she could see the title Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. "Poetry?" she asked, surprised. "Is that so strange for a rancher?" "Perhaps a little." Nathaniel smiled. "I wasn't always a rancher. I studied at Columbia College for 2 years before coming west." "Why did you leave?" "My father died. There wasn't enough money to continue, and truthfully, I was restless for something different." His fingers traced the book's worn cover. "But I brought my books with me." "What else do you read?" "Whatever I can get my hands on. Thomas at the general store orders books for me from back east." They talked quietly for over an hour, discovering shared interests in literature and history. Nathaniel was more educated than Nora had initially assumed, and she found herself engaged in the kind of intellectual conversation she'd missed since leaving her position as a companion. When she finally returned to bed, her nightmares didn't return. Instead, she fell into a peaceful sleep, her mind filled with images of the man across the table, his eyes reflecting the lamplight as he spoke of poetry and dreams. Over the next few weeks, a tentative friendship blossomed between them. During the days, Nora learned the rhythms of ranch life, how to manage the household with limited resources, how to preserve food for the coming winter, how to coax the kitchen garden to yield a few late vegetables despite the cooling weather. Nathaniel taught her to ride, starting with an elderly mare whose gentle disposition suited a beginner. At first, Nora was terrified, clinging to the saddle horn with white knuckles. By the end of October, she was confident enough to accompany Nathaniel on short rides around the property, drinking in the vast landscape with increasing appreciation. In the evenings, they often read together by the fire, sometimes discussing the books, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence. Occasionally, Nathaniel would read aloud, his deep voice giving new dimension to familiar passages. Through it all, they maintained a careful physical distance. Nathaniel was unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon their arrangement. Nora, still adjusting to her new life and haunted by her past, was grateful for his patience. One evening in early November, as the first real chill of winter crept into the air, Nathaniel cleared his throat during supper. "There's a harvest dance in town this Saturday," he said, his tone deliberately casual. "Would you like to attend?" Nora looked up from her plate, surprised by the invitation. "A dance? It's an annual tradition. Nothing fancy, just the townspeople gathering at the meeting hall. There's music, dancing, food." He shrugged slightly. "It might be a good opportunity for you to get to know more people." The thought of being surrounded by strangers made her nervous, but Nora recognized the importance of establishing herself in the community. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with her sincerity. "Good." Nathaniel seemed pleased. Fair warning, my dancing isn't much to speak of. 2 left feet, Thomas Ross used to say. I can teach you a few simple steps before Saturday if you'd like, Nora offered. That might save us both some embarrassment. The next evening, after the dishes were washed and put away, Nathaniel moved the furniture in the living area to create a small dance floor. Nora, feeling suddenly self-conscious, stood awkwardly in the center of the room. I'm not sure where to begin, she admitted. I know the steps, but I've never taught anyone before. Start with the basics, Nathaniel suggested. I promise to be a willing student, all right. The waltz is probably easiest, it's just a 3-step pattern. She demonstrated the box step, counting softly. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Nathaniel watched attentively, then attempted to mimic her movements. His first efforts were clumsy, but he was a quick study, his natural grace overcoming his lack of experience. Now we try it together, Nora said, extending her hands. The moment his hand settled at her waist, while the other clasped hers, something shifted in the atmosphere between them. They had maintained such careful distance that this simple, proper touch felt startlingly intimate. Nora fixed her gaze on his shirt collar, afraid to meet his eyes. 1, 2, 3, she counted softly, leading him through the steps. They moved stiffly at first, adjusting to each other's rhythm. Nathaniel stepped on her toes once, apologizing profusely, but soon they found a comfortable pace. You're doing well, Nora encouraged, finally looking up. I have a good teacher. His eyes, warm in the lamplight, held hers. They continued practicing for nearly an hour, gradually relaxing into the dance. By the end, Nathaniel was confident enough to add a simple turn that made Nora laugh with surprise. See. Not hopeless after all, he said as they finally stepped apart. Far from it. Nora's cheeks were flushed, as much from the unexpected pleasure of being in his arms as from the exertion. You'll be the envy of all the ladies at the dance. I doubt that, but at least I won't disgrace you. On Saturday evening, Nora dressed with particular care, wearing her best dress, a deep burgundy wool with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. She'd reworked it slightly to better fit the current fashion, though she was acutely aware that her clothing was simple compared to what women like Margaret Holloway would wear. When she emerged from her room, Nathaniel was waiting by the fireplace, dressed in a clean black suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and for a moment, Nora could easily imagine him as the college student he'd once been. You look beautiful, he said simply, his admiration evident. Thank you. She smoothed her skirts nervously. You're quite handsome yourself. The ride to town was cold with a sharp wind blowing down from the mountains. Nathaniel had brought an extra blanket which he tucked around Nora's legs. Winter comes quickly here, he explained. By December we could have snow. I've never experienced a winter outside the East, Nora said. Is it very harsh? It can be. The house is solid though, and we have plenty of firewood stacked. We'll be comfortable enough. The casual "we" wasn't lost on Nora. Despite their undefined relationship, Nathaniel clearly assumed she would still be there when winter arrived in earnest. The meeting hall was transformed for the occasion, with paper lanterns hanging from the rafters and tables laden with food along one wall. A small group of musicians, 2 fiddlers, a guitarist, and an accordion player were setting up on a makeshift stage. Nathaniel, you made it. Thomas from the general store greeted them warmly. And Miss Valcourt, lovely to see you again. Please call me Nora, she replied, accepting his handshake. Nora it is. Let me introduce you to my wife, Sarah. Sarah Thomas was a plump, cheerful woman with kind eyes. Welcome to Las Lunas, my dear. We were beginning to think Nathaniel was keeping you all to himself out at that ranch. I've been getting settled, Nora explained. Learning how things work out here. It's quite different from the East, I imagine. I came from Philadelphia myself nearly 20 years ago now. Sarah patted her hand. If you ever need anything, advice, help, or just a friendly ear, our door is always open. Thank you. That's very kind. As the evening progressed, Nora was introduced to dozens of people, ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the schoolteacher, the doctor and his family. Most were welcoming, though she noticed Margaret Holloway observing her from across the room with barely disguised suspicion. The sheriff was present as well, dancing enthusiastically with his wife, a tiny woman with a booming laugh. When the dance ended, he approached Nathaniel and Nora. "Kingston, good to see you socializing for once," he said good-naturedly. "Miss Valcourt, you look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Sheriff," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's a wonderful gathering. First of many, I hope. Doris here was just saying we need more young women in town." He indicated his wife, who nodded vigorously. "The men outnumber us 3-1, Doris Davis explained. "It upsets the natural balance, bad for society." "I'm not sure one more woman will make much difference," Nora said with a small smile. "Every little bit helps, my dear." Doris leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Besides, you've already made a difference to one man from what I can see." Before Nora could respond, the musician struck up a waltz and Nathaniel turned to her. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally, extending his hand. "I'd be delighted," she replied, relieved at the timely interruption. As they moved onto the dance floor, Nathaniel's hand settled at her waist, just as it had during their practice sessions. But here, surrounded by the community, with lantern light casting a golden glow over the proceedings, the moment felt different, more significant. "You remembered the steps," Nora observed as he guided her confidently through the waltz. "I had an excellent teacher." His eyes held hers, warm with admiration. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "More than I expected to," she admitted. "People have been kind. They like you." Even Sheriff Davis, which is saying something he doesn't trust easily. The music swelled, and Nathaniel drew her slightly closer, still maintaining a proper distance but creating a sense of intimacy amid the crowd. Nora was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the faint scent of soap and leather that she'd come to associate with him. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "That I haven't danced like this in a very long time, that I'd forgotten how pleasant it could be with the right partner." His smile was worth the moment of honesty. "I was thinking something similar." When the waltz ended, they were approached by Ellis Parker and his wife Clara, a tall, angular woman with intelligent eyes. "Kingston, Miss Valcourt." Ellis nodded in greeting. "Clara's been wanting to meet your fiancé." "I hope you're settling in well," Clara said, studying Nora with interest. "The first winter can be challenging for those not used to our ways." "Nathaniel has been very patient in teaching me," Nora replied. "He's a good man." Clara's assessment seemed to include more than was said aloud. "If you need anything, advice, company when the men are out with the cattle, our ranch is just an hour's ride south." "Thank you. I appreciate that." As the evening continued, Nora danced not only with Nathaniel but with several other men as well, Ellis, Thomas, and even Sheriff Davis, who proved to be surprisingly light on his feet. Between dances, she found herself drawn into conversations with the local women, who were curious about her background but not intrusively so. Only Margaret Holloway maintained a cool distance, watching from the periphery with narrowed eyes. When her husband, a corpulent man with an authoritative manner, approached Nora for a dance, Margaret's displeasure was evident. "Don't mind Margaret," Clara Parker whispered to Nora as they watched the banker whirl Nora around the floor with more enthusiasm than skill. "She's convinced every woman under 40 is after her husband. though God knows why Frank Holloway is about as appealing as a rattlesnake. Near midnight, as the celebration was winding down, Nathaniel found Nora by the refreshment table. "Ready to head home?" he asked. "It's getting late and the temperature's dropping." Home. The word still caused a small flutter in her chest. "Yes, I think so. I've had a wonderful time, but I'm getting tired." They said their goodbyes, accepting invitations to visit from several of their new acquaintances. As they stepped outside into the cold night air, Nora shivered despite her heavy shawl. "Here," Nathaniel removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "It's a long ride back." "But you'll freeze," she protested. "I'm used to it. The cold doesn't bother me much." The ride home was quiet, both of them reflecting on the evening. The stars blazed overhead in the clear night sky, countless points of light that seemed close enough to touch. "I never saw stars like this in the east," Nora murmured, gazing upward. "There were always too many buildings, too many lamps." "It's one of the things I love most about this place," Nathaniel replied. "The sky goes on forever. Makes a man feel small, but in a good way, like being part of something vast and eternal." When they reached the ranch, Nathaniel helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. In the moonlight, his expression was difficult to read. "Thank you for tonight," Nora said softly. "For everything." "No thanks needed." He hesitated, then added, "I was proud to have you beside me this evening. You charmed everyone." "Not everyone." Margaret Holloway looked like she'd found something unpleasant in her tea every time she glanced my way. Nathaniel chuckled. "Margaret looks at everyone that way. It's nothing personal." Inside, the house was cold. Nathaniel quickly built up the fire while Nora made coffee to warm them both. They sat before the growing flames, the events of the evening still fresh in their minds. "You miss it?" Nora asked suddenly. "The East, I mean. The culture, the conveniences." Nathaniel considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. Mostly I miss the bookshops, the libraries, access to new ideas, but I don't miss the crowds or the way people live on top of each other with no room to breathe." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Now that you've had a taste of life out here, do you find yourself longing for what you left behind?" "No," Nora answered without hesitation. "Even before the trouble with the Prescotts, I never felt I belonged there. Everything was so rigidly defined: who you were, where you fit in society, what was expected of you. Here, it's as though the land is too big for those petty distinctions." "It won't always be this way," Nathaniel said thoughtfully. "As more people come west, they bring their ideas with them, good and bad. But for now, at least, there's a certain freedom in the emptiness." They talked long into the night, the conversation flowing easily between them. When Nora finally retired to her room, she was aware of a subtle shift in their relationship, a deepening of trust, a strengthening of the bond that had been forming since her arrival. The weeks following the harvest dance brought a new rhythm to their lives. Nathaniel was busier with winter preparations, securing the livestock, ensuring adequate feed supplies, weatherproofing the buildings. Nora took on more household responsibilities, preserving the last of the garden produce, and making the interior of the house more comfortable for the cold months ahead. In town, she was now greeted by name, invited to join the women's quilting circle, consulted on plans for the Christmas festivities. Only Margaret Holloway maintained her chilly demeanor, though even she had progressed to acknowledging Nora's presence with a curt nod. One afternoon in late November, as Nora was returning from a visit to Clara Parker, she noticed a rider approaching the ranch from the direction of town. As the figure drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Davis. Heart pounding, she urged her mare faster, determined to reach home before he did. Had someone recognized her? Had word come from the east about a fugitive matching her description? She arrived just minutes before the sheriff, barely having time to compose herself before he dismounted in the yard. Nathaniel was still out checking cattle, leaving her to face Davis alone. "Afternoon, Miss Valcourt," he called, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, Sheriff," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Nathaniel's out with the herd, but he should be back soon. Would you like some coffee while you wait?" "That would be mighty welcome. Getting cold out there." Inside, Nora moved efficiently around the kitchen, heating water for coffee while the sheriff settled at the table. Her hands shook slightly as she measured the grounds. "You're adapting well to ranch life," Davis observed. Not every Eastern woman could make the transition so smoothly. "I've always been adaptable." She placed a cup of steaming coffee before him. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff? Is everything all right?" Davis took a sip before answering. "Just making my rounds." "Part of the job is keeping an eye on the outlying properties, especially as winter approaches." He studied her over the rim of his cup. "But since we have this moment alone, there is something I wanted to discuss with you." Nora's throat constricted. "Oh." "I received a notice last week from authorities back east. Seems they're looking for a young woman who escaped custody in Boston. Theft charges." His eyes, sharp and assessing, never left her face. "Woman matching your general description." She sank slowly into the chair across from him, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "I see." "Do you?" Davis's tone remained conversational. "The thing is, Miss Valcourt, I've been sheriff in this county for 12 years. I've gotten pretty good at reading people in that time." He leaned forward slightly. "And something about that notice didn't sit right with me." Nora remained silent, fear and resignation battling within her. The woman they described, a calculating thief who manipulated her employer's trust, doesn't match the person I've come to know these past weeks. Davis took another sip of coffee. "So I find myself with a dilemma. Do my duty and report that a woman matching the description is living at Kingston's ranch, or trust my instincts that there's more to the story?" What did you decide?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't decided yet," he replied honestly. "That's why I'm here. I'd like to hear your version before I make up my mind." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Nora could deny everything, claim mistaken identity. She could try to run again. Or she could trust this man with the truth, as she had trusted Nathaniel. Taking a deep breath, she made her choice. "My name is Nora Valcourt. I worked as a companion to Mrs. Eliza Prescott in Boston for almost 2 years. Her son, Edmund, made unwanted advances. When I refused him, he retaliated by accusing me of stealing his mother's diamond necklace." The words came more easily now that she'd begun, the truth flowing out like water through a broken dam. "I was arrested on his testimony alone. There was no evidence the necklace was never found, but his word carried more weight than mine." Davis listened without interruption, his expression neutral. "The night before I was to be transferred to prison, there was a fire at the jail. In the confusion, I walked away. I had no plan except to get as far from Boston as possible." She met his gaze directly. "I didn't steal anything, Sheriff, but I did escape custody, and for that I am guilty." "Why answer Kingston's advertisement? Why come all the way to New Mexico territory?" "It seemed like the furthest place I could go, and I needed protection, I suppose, a new identity. I intended to be honest with him eventually, but I was afraid he'd turn me away if he knew from the start. But he didn't. No." A small smile touched her lips despite the gravity of the situation. "When I told him, just hours after arriving, he said he didn't care about yesterday, that out here people get second chances." Davis nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like Kingston. He's always been more concerned with what a person does than where they came from. He studied her for a long moment. Do you care for him? Or is this still just an arrangement of convenience? The question caught her off guard. Yes, I care for him very much. Good. Because he deserves someone who sees his worth. The sheriff finished his coffee and set the cup aside. Here's what I'm going to do, Miss Valcourt. I'm going to reply to that notice, stating that no one matching the description has been seen in my jurisdiction. Then I'm going to file it away and forget about it. Nora stared at him, scarcely believing what she was hearing. Why would you do that? Because in 12 years as sheriff, I've learned that the law isn't always just, and justice isn't always served by following the letter of the law. Davis stood, retrieving his hat from the table. You've become part of this community. You make Kingston happy. That counts for something with me. I don't know what to say. No need to say anything. Just keep building your life here. Be good to each other. He moved toward the door, then paused. One piece of advice, though if I were you, I'd make this arrangement official sooner rather than later. A marriage certificate offers certain protections that an engagement doesn't. You mean in case someone else recognizes me? That, and other reasons. A woman alone is always more vulnerable than one with a husband's name. His expression softened slightly, but mostly because it's clear to everyone but maybe yourselves that you belong together. After the sheriff left, Nora remained at the table, stunned by the unexpected reprieve. When Nathaniel returned an hour later, he found her still sitting there, staring into the cold fireplace. Nora, concern edged his voice. What's wrong? Are you ill? She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Sheriff Davis was here, his face paled. What did he want? To tell me he received a notice about a fugitive from Boston matching my description. She rose from the chair, moving toward him as though drawn by an invisible force, and to say he's going to ignore it. What? Nathaniel's confusion was evident. He knows, Nathaniel. He knows everything, and he's choosing to protect me. The first tear spilled over, trailing down her cheek. He said I've become part of the community, that I make you happy. Nathaniel reached out, gently brushing the tear away with his thumb. You do make me happy. Happier than I've been in years. The tenderness of the gesture broke something open inside her. I was so afraid. When I saw him riding toward the house, I thought my time here was over. I wouldn't have let them take you, he said fiercely. Even if I had to take you and run. You would have left everything you've built here. For me, in a heartbeat. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. They stood close together, the moment suspended between them. Then, with a courage born of recent fear, Nora rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Nathaniel responded with equal care, his hands coming to rest lightly at her waist. When they finally parted, his eyes searched hers. I've wanted to do that since the harvest dance, he admitted. Maybe even before. Why didn't you? I didn't want you to feel obligated. Our arrangement, it complicated things. Nora smiled, a new confidence flowing through her. I think it's time we simplified matters, don't you? What do you mean? The sheriff suggested we make our arrangement official. For protection, he said. Her heart pounded as she added, but I find I have other reasons for wanting to be your wife. Nathaniel's hands tightened slightly at her waist. Are you proposing to me, Nora Valcourt? I believe I am, Nathaniel Kingston. Despite her boldness, a blush crept up her cheeks. Unless you'd prefer to do the asking. I would, actually. His smile was tender as he took her hand in his. I had planned to wait until Christmas, but since we're here now. He drew a deep breath. Nora, these past weeks have shown me what was missing from my life. Not just a housekeeper or companion, but a true partner, someone to share the work and the rewards, the hardships and the joys. I love you. Will you marry me, not because it's convenient or safer, but because we belong together?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." This time when they kissed, there was no hesitation, only the certainty of two people who had found in each other something worth holding on to. They were married the following Sunday in a simple ceremony at the small church in Las Lunas. Despite the short notice, most of the community attended, filling the pews with friendly faces. Clara Parker stood beside Nora as her matron of honor, while Ellis served as Nathaniel's best man. Even Margaret Holloway was present, though she remained in the back row, her expression inscrutable. The sheriff and his wife occupied a prominent position, Doris beaming as though she personally had arranged the match. The bride wore a dress of deep blue, hastily altered from her best gown with lace provided by Clara and Sarah Thomas. Nathaniel, in his black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The preacher, a circuit rider who served several small communities in the area, kept the service brief but meaningful. When it came time for the vows, Nathaniel's voice was steady, his gaze never leaving Nora's face as he promised to cherish and protect her all the days of his life. Nora, her heart full to bursting, spoke her own vows clearly, claiming this man and this life as her own, freely chosen rather than accepted out of necessity. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The reception was held at the meeting hall, the same space where they had danced just weeks before. The women of the community had outdone themselves, preparing a feast that would be talked about for months to come. Wine flowed freely, toasts were offered, and music filled the air as afternoon stretched into evening. "Mrs. Kingston," Sheriff Davis said, approaching Nora during a lull in the celebrations, "congratulations. You make a beautiful bride." "Thank you, Sheriff, for everything." Her gratitude encompassed far more than his good wishes. "John, please, we're all friends here." He glanced over at Nathaniel, who was deep in conversation with Ellis and Thomas. "He's a good man. You both deserve this happiness." As the evening progressed, Nora found herself overwhelmed by the genuine goodwill surrounding them. These people, who barely knew her, had embraced her as one of their own. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly free, not just from the threat of arrest, but from the shadow of fear that had haunted her steps. When they finally left the reception, amid cheers and good-natured teasing, night had fallen. The ride back to the ranch, their home now, truly shared, was companionable, both of them quietly absorbing the momentous change in their relationship. Inside, Nathaniel built up the fire while Nora changed out of her wedding dress. When she emerged from the bedroom, their bedroom now, she found him waiting for her by the hearth, his expression a mixture of desire and tenderness. "Come here, wife," he said softly, extending his hand. She went to him without hesitation, fitting herself against him as though they had been created for each other. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, as his lips found hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Nora rested her head on Nathaniel's chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice a rumble beneath her ear. "More than I ever thought possible." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. "When I stepped off that train in Las Lunas, I was terrified. I had no idea what awaited me, only that I couldn't go back. And now I know I was running toward something, not just away." She traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Toward you, toward this life we're building. No regrets about leaving the East behind, none." Her certainty was absolute. "This is where I belong, with you." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Sleep now. Tomorrow begins our first full day as husband and wife. The first of many, she murmured, already drifting toward sleep, safe in the arms of the man who had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most, and love when she least expected it. Winter descended on New Mexico territory with a vengeance that year. December brought snow that blanketed the ranch in pristine white, transforming the landscape into something out of a fairy tale. Nathaniel and Nora settled into married life with surprising ease, their days filled with work and their nights with each other. For Christmas, despite the harsh weather, they hosted a small gathering: the Parkers, the Thomases, and Sheriff Davis and his wife. The house, decorated with evergreen boughs and red berries Nora had gathered herself, was warm with fellowship and good cheer. After their guests had gone, Nathaniel presented Nora with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Kingston," he said, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of her parents that she'd kept in her Bible, now carefully sized to fit the small frame. "How did you?" she began, tears welling in her eyes. "I sent it to a jeweler in Santa Fe. I hoped it would be back in time." He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. "So you can keep them close to your heart." "It's perfect," she whispered, touching the locket reverently. "Thank you." Her gift to him was more practical: a fine leather-bound journal and pens she'd ordered through Thomas at the general store. "For your thoughts," she explained. "You told me once that you missed having someone to discuss ideas with back east. I thought perhaps you could write them down." "You remembered that." He seemed touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you. I'll use it well." January brought bitter cold and a blizzard that kept them housebound for nearly a week. They passed the time reading to each other, playing chess. Nora proved to be a formidable opponent, and making love beside the fire when the bedroom grew too cold. "You regret marrying a fugitive?" Nora asked one night as they lay entwined beneath a mound of quilts, the wind howling outside their window. "Never." Nathaniel's voice was firm. "Do you regret marrying a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and more cattle than cash?" She laughed softly. "Never." By February, Nora was beginning to suspect a new development in their lives. Her monthly courses, never entirely regular, had failed to appear for 2 months running. She felt different, too more tired in the afternoons, slightly queasy in the mornings. She said nothing to Nathaniel, wanting to be certain before sharing her suspicions. Instead, she visited Clara Parker, who had raised 5 children of her own and was known for her practical wisdom. "How far along do you think you are?" Clara asked after hearing Nora's symptoms. 2 months, perhaps. It's difficult to be sure. Clara nodded thoughtfully. "The timing sounds right. The baby would arrive in late summer, then a good time for birthing. Not too hot, not too cold yet." She squeezed Nora's hand. "Nathaniel will be overjoyed." "I hope so," Nora replied, suddenly nervous. They hadn't discussed children specifically, though she knew he wanted a family eventually. "Of course he will be," Clara assured her. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon. A child born of that love will be treasured beyond measure." That evening, after supper, Nora asked Nathaniel to sit with her by the fire. "I have something to tell you," she began, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Is everything all right?" Concern immediately creased his brow. "You've been tired lately." "Yes, everything is fine." She took his hand, placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "Better than fine, actually. We're going to have a baby, Nathaniel, in late summer if my calculations are correct." His expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby?" He repeated as though testing the word. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation. I visited Clara today and she agrees." A slow smile spread across his face, joy illuminating his features. "A baby," he said again with growing conviction. His arms encircled her, drawing her close. "Our baby." "You're happy then?" Happy doesn't begin to describe it. His voice was thick with emotion. "When I sent for a bride, I hoped for companionship, perhaps affection in time. I never dreamed I'd find this true love, a family of my own." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "Nor did I. When I ran from Boston, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." The coming months brought changes to the ranch. Nathaniel hired 2 young men from town to help with the heavier work, insisting that Nora rest more as her pregnancy progressed. She protested that she wasn't an invalid but secretly appreciated his concern. In April, they received unexpected news from Boston. Sheriff Davis arrived one afternoon, a telegram in hand. "This came for you," he said, handing the paper to Nora. "I thought you'd want to see it right away." The message was from Sarah Thomas's cousin in Boston, who had been asked to make discreet inquiries on Nora's behalf. Prescott Necklace found Stop Edmund confessed to pawning IT stop charges against Valcourt, dropped Stop Nora read the words aloud, her voice shaking with disbelief. "I'm free." "Appears so," the sheriff confirmed. "The Boston authorities have officially closed the case against you. You're no longer a fugitive, Mrs. Kingston." She sank into a chair, one hand instinctively cradling her growing belly. After all this time, why would Edmund confess now? "The telegram doesn't say, but my guess is he got himself into other trouble and this came out during the investigation." Davis shrugged. "Men like that rarely reform." Nathaniel knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "This is wonderful news, Nora. You don't have to look over your shoulder anymore. We could visit the East if you wanted," she realized suddenly. "See New York, Boston." "Is that what you want?" he asked carefully. She considered the question, really considered it. "No," she said finally. "I'm curious, perhaps, to see those places again someday, but this is our home now. This is where we belong." The relief in his expression was palpable. "I would have gone if you wanted to. I know you would have." She leaned forward to kiss him softly. "But our life is here. Our future is here." As summer approached, bringing with it the promise of new life, Nora often reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place. From a respectable companion to an accused thief, from a desperate fugitive to a mail-order bride, from a woman alone to a beloved wife, each step, even the painful ones, had been necessary to lead her here. On a warm August evening, with Clara Parker and the doctor in attendance, Nora gave birth to a son, Thomas Ellis Kingston, named for Nathaniel's former partner and their good friend and neighbor. The baby was healthy and strong, with a shock of dark hair and his father's determined chin. Nathaniel, who had paced outside during the delivery, entered the bedroom with trepidation, his face pale with worry until he saw Nora propped against the pillows, tired but radiant, their son cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He approached the bed slowly, as though afraid they might disappear if he moved too quickly. When he finally looked down at the tiny face peering up at him from the blankets, his expression was one of pure awe. "He's perfect," Nathaniel whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek with one finger. "Just like his mother." "Would you like to hold him?" Nora asked. With infinite care, Nathaniel took his son into his arms, cradling him against his chest as though he were made of the finest crystal. The baby yawned, his tiny fist waving in the air before coming to rest against his father's shirt. "Hello, Thomas," Nathaniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to the world, son." In that moment, watching the man she loved hold their child, Nora felt a completion she had never thought possible. The circle was perfect: husband, wife, child, home. A family built from trust and second chances. 6 months later, as winter once again blanketed the ranch in white, Nathaniel and Nora celebrated their first wedding anniversary. Thomas, growing rapidly and already showing signs of his father's curious nature, slept peacefully in the cradle Nathaniel had crafted for him. "I have something for you," Nathaniel said, retrieving a small package from his desk drawer. "For our anniversary." Inside, Nora found a key on a ribbon. "What's this?" "The key to the house, our house." He took her hands in his. "I know you already think of this as your home, but I wanted to make it official. I've had the deed changed to include your name alongside mine. This ranch belongs to both of us now, equally." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Nathaniel, I never want you to feel like a guest here or that your place depends on my goodwill. What's mine is yours, completely and forever." He pressed a kiss to her palm. "This land, this home, this life, we built it together, and it belongs to both of us." "I don't know what to say," she whispered, deeply moved by the gesture. "Say you'll grow old with me here. Say you'll help me raise our son and maybe more children if we're blessed with them. Say you'll never regret the day you stepped off that train in Las Lunas." "Never," she promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Not for a single moment. Outside, snow fell softly, covering their tracks and smoothing the landscape into pristine whiteness. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the small family gathered in its warmth. A man who had once been alone, a woman who had once been afraid, and a child born of their love together, making something new and beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. In the years that followed, the Kingston ranch prospered. Thomas grew into a strong, thoughtful boy with his father's love of the land and his mother's quick intelligence. He was joined by a sister, Clara Sarah, 3 years later, and another brother, William John, 2 years after that. Nora, once a fugitive with nothing but a small valise and desperate hope, became a respected member of the community, serving on the school board, organizing the town's first lending library, and mentoring other Eastern women who followed the path she had taken west. Nathaniel, whose quiet strength had provided sanctuary when she needed it most, never once mentioned her past without her bringing it up first. True to his word that first day, he didn't care about yesterday, only about the life they were building together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and they sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Nora would touch the silver locket at her throat and marvel at the journey that had brought her here. "Any regrets?" Nathaniel would ask occasionally, reading her thoughts, and always her answer was the same: "Only that I didn't find you sooner." For a woman who had once been running from the law, and a cowboy who had said he didn't care about yesterday, the present was sweet indeed, and the future stretched before them like the vast New Mexico sky, endless with possibility, rich with promise, and completely their own.